Greetings! It is I, Countess Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire. Welcome! It is time to continue our discussion on the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, 5th edition D&D. Today I'm going to continue talking about being a dungeon master. I started talking about it, now I'm going to get into some more details that are important for you to be a dungeon master, or to kind of get an idea of what your dungeon master has to go through. So, let's start talking about it. Whether you're using a pre-existing world or a world that's already established, you're going to have to be looking to the player's handbook and the monster manual to get a guide of what kind of the standard or generic things that exist in a D&D world are, what the basics that stay the same between all of them exist as. Now, there are, of course, exceptional worlds with exceptional different rules. Look at Spelljammer, your D&D in space. There are other worlds that are very similar that have very extremes to them. You're going to look at whatever world you're using or want to use and figure out where you fall on this spectrum of worlds. Whether you're one that's very standard or one that brings in some of the exceptions that make your world more interesting and different. So there are, of course, certain basics that you're going to assume are true for the majority of D&D worlds. These are the first things you're going to have to look at, and most of the time you're going to assume they're basic for your worlds. The first off is gods are real. Gods actually exist as some form of powerful being that looks over the people below them. Their influence can be found everywhere, whether it's through clerics or for direct influence. If you go to one of the realms where they exist in, you could meet with one of them. They probably would not be happy about meeting you. Maybe depends on their alignment, but you could. Gods exist as a tangible thing in the world. Next, we have to talk that the world is wild. There are huge swaths of untamed wilderness and areas to explore and go to that people don't know about in these worlds. If you look at many of these world settings, they talk about how there's areas that no one has ever been to, or they talk about, or there's rumors about them. Ways to get to these magical places where, oh, there's something civilized over there. We know about them because we occasionally meet them. The journey there is not set in stone, so it's a trip in and of itself, journeying there. The other thing is the world is ancient. Civilizations rise and they fall, and you can find many of these world settings have ancient civilizations built deep into them, or signs of empires that once existed, so you can explore ruins or strange places marked upon by people that no longer exist anymore. These worlds are often shaped by conflict, too. Wars and battles and swaths of monsters can cause all kinds of destruction and damage and change history for the better or for the worse. And you can find that these events that occur have either already shaped the world itself or will come about to shape it even more. And the world is also magical. Magic is a prevalent thing. There aren't a huge amount of spellcasters. They are very unusual, and though you think that they would be more usual because of player characters, you have to consider that player characters, or the characters you're going to be playing, are far few exceptions. Most people are just general people. They don't have the kind of abilities that your characters gain. So wizards and spellcasters are exceptions to the rules, those that wield magic. So the effects they cause, the items they make, the things they do, leave lasting influence on the world. Now, some suggestions for building your own world come out of these very assumptions, that you can choose one or two of these very assumptions and ignore them. You could do that, and you could cause it that you're bringing about a new and exciting world you're bringing about. What if you assume the world is mundane? There isn't a lot of magic. Magic is incredibly rare. You don't find a lot of effects of it. Think about what that would mean if you were a spellcaster in this world where magic is more legend than anything and not really existing in a large amount. You could also be from a world that's new. There are no signs of these ancient and great empires. Perhaps you are part of one of these ancient and great empires, that there isn't a history before you. Think of the effects of that you're not living in a world that has a history to it, that you're creating the history in and of itself. Now, what if the world was known? What if there was one great empire that stretched across the majority of the world, meaning that there were no real unknown places in the world? Think about that you're exploring, but you're exploring places that are actually on the map, that are known, that maybe there could be a secret hidden there, but it's already been explored. It makes it harder to find these unusual and hidden secrets. That is a world that's known to things. Monsters could be uncommon. You would think that most people wouldn't encounter a lot of the monsters that are prevalent in a normal D&D world, that you would have to not have to worry about them. Maybe there is this threat looming and people talk about them, but they just don't see them enough to actually tangibly feel that there's a threat from them. It also could be on the opposite side of the mundane world, a magical world where magic is prevalent everywhere. While spellcasters rule cities and spellcasters have made amazing and fantastic things using their magic, that magic is everywhere and prevalent in every aspect of life. It would be a very interesting, different kind of world that you would have with this entire magic everywhere. On the deity side, there are two things you could have. The deities walk the earth. In the normal D&D game, the deities are real, but they exist on other planes and don't really go there. What if they actually walked the earth among you? What if they were there as a tangible, possible threat on the actual land itself? The gods walk among you. On the other hand, what if they were absent, or just so distant that you could barely hear their voices saying you were a cleric or something? That their influence just did not exist there. Maybe rumors of some forgotten gods exist. Maybe some small connections to them. But the true influence of them, gone. What kind of world would that be? Now, speaking of deities, let's talk about your deities and their pantheons. Now, all the pantheons that are suggested in the Player's Handbook are very loose pantheons, meaning that you have a large number of deities that represent a lot of different things, that they come together to form a pantheon. You have to think that in a D&D world, they are polytheistic. That means they worship many deities, or many people will worship more than one of these deities. They will give thanks to these deities when they do certain things. If I'm going fishing, I might give thanks to Umberly. If I'm going to have a nice harvest, I might give thanks to Shantea, using the Forgotten Realms deities, of course, in this situation. There are exceptions of people that serve one particular deity. They become priests and clerics and paladins of that deity and serve them in particular. Each of these deities, of course, will have temples and shrines to them where are gathering spots for various events, for festivals related to those deities. So you're building out this pantheon. And you can make your own pantheon, of course. You could use combinations from the various pantheons suggested. If you're making your own one, you at very least want to have one deity representing each of the separate domains listed in the book under the cleric section, in the Player's Handbook. That'll give you at least the basics of the set of deities you would have. Beyond that, it's up to you to determine things. If there's more deities, if there's anything else, what kind of expanding pantheon you're going to have. When I'm talking about deities, I do have to talk about their divine rank. Divine rank is a very important thing that they mention in a sidebar in this section of the book. Divine rank defines how powerful a deity it is, what kind of deity it is, what kind of powers it has. The higher divine rank it would have, the more powerful it would be, the more able to give people things or to roll over people, probably the more people that are worshipping it. So in a way, also, the less you might hear its voice, but the more powerful it would be if it would hear your voice. Interesting trade-off. So they list all the different divine ranks and what they mean to a divine type creature that you should be dealing with it. Now, there are ways to change pantheons around to make them more exceptional, more interesting. First off, you could, of course, make it a type pantheon. This means a more limited amount of deities. You could have a couple of different deities that represent a couple of different domains, for example, maybe like 3 or 4 different deities that represent every different aspect of the world, making a tighter, less loose group of deities. You, of course, could give it you could have a mystery cult feel. That means that there would be various cults that would worship different things. Examples would be like Roman cults, where they had various cults worshiping different sort of ideals rather than the main pantheon as a whole. They come up with ideas that they worship one main being and see it as their sort of main being, and they have very much cult ways of dealing with it. You could have that something very prevalent in your society, in the world you're in. You, of course, could have it monotheistic, the opposite of polytheistic. There could be one deity that they all worship. Whatever reason for this, you could just come up that there is one deity that is worshipped by the world. Any of the other deities would be considered blasphemous. Maybe there are others that exist, but this one religion believes that their deity is the only one that exists, and therefore tries to purge all the others. Whatever circumstance it is, whether there is only one, or there is multiple ones, but the one religion, up to you how you want to handle that. There, of course, is dualism. Dualism means that for whatever sort of main force there is in the universe, there's two deities to it. Effectively, there's a light and a dark deity. This is similar to the polytheism where there's only one, except in place of one, there's two that represents the light and dark. Or something very similar. It could represent Earth and space, sun and moon, any kind of dualistic kind of thing, good and evil, whatever it would be, that would be the central aspect of the religion at hand. There, of course, is animalism, where you're worshipping spirits in nature. That's a more natural looking to it. There is no main deity. You're looking to various members of spirits, to the nature itself, to give your worships. And there, of course, is forces and philosophies. Forces and philosophies is a much more philosophical way. It has that similar idealism of animalism where you're worshipping an intangible force, but the force itself maybe is based upon more philosophical ideas or scientific ideas. So it's almost a scientific approach to religion, but with a religious connotation to it. So in that retrospect, they are worshipping specific forces, but these forces aren't necessarily all natural. So the last thing I do want to talk about when related to deities and of course pantheons is deities and other races. When we talk about these, we're talking about their general aspect, but other races have their own specific deities or possibly own pantheons. If you look in the Forgotten Realms setting, if you look back at the old material, elves had their own pantheon of deities. They really did. They had a central deity and their own separate pantheon. This sort of means that each race has their own way of thinking of things. Of course, there's the general idea of the pantheons, but each race then would almost have their own specific group dedicated to themselves. And this doesn't really work for humanity, as many gods have claimed to create humanity, but who really did is lost to the ages, so no one really claims humanity, so they're the exception to any kind of rule like this. I talked about some of the very basics of world building, of different things that are general ideas, generic ideas that are in a lot of D&D worlds, and how you could either alter or use them to create your own world. And I moved in to talk about deities and pantheons, of the divine powers of your world, about how you're defining what that divine power is, if you're making something different from what's classic to D&D, or making something very similar, and how it affects either other races, or just the world in general. Next time, I'm going to talk about settlements and mapping your world. Two different things that are now bringing in some of the people aspect of your world. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please just leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows your support for the channel, the empire, and the work I do. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.